Mr. Speaker, I begin my presentation by expressing gratitude to the opposition leader, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller, for having the wisdom and foresight to create a shadow portfolio area named the knowledge economy, and for asking me to lead this area. In its most basic form, the knowledge economy is predicated on the use of intellectual assets or brain power as the principal driver of growth and development. I thank our leader for her confidence. I wish to thank my parliamentary colleagues for their continued support. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the constituents of South East St. Andrew for continuing to repose their confidence in me and for returning me to these chambers with an increased majority. The leadership of my constituency is here, the councillors, Andrew Swaby, Deputy Mayor, Kari Douglas from the Trafalgar Division, my constituency secretary, Ivy Hill, my constituency organizer, Sonia Forbes, who together have given over 60 years of service to this constituency. The executive of the constituency is here, the support team, and I want to thank them all for the support they have given me over the years. Time doesn't permit me this evening, Mr. Speaker, to give an account of my work as Member of Parliament. I continue to be committed to providing quality representation with integrity and for basing my representation on the principles of openness, transparency, and a participatory democracy. In this regard, my annual reports from 2012 through 2016, which provide an overview of my stewardship as Member of Parliament, are all available on my website. My family, Mr. Speaker, is the bedrock of my support. I represent the third generation of my family to be elected to this House. My grandmother would often jokingly say that every generation has a fool. And I think she was referring to me as the fool in my generation that decided to enter representational politics. I'm grateful to them, Mr. Speaker, for their support and for always being there. Mr. Speaker, my presentation this afternoon will outline a number of key initiatives undertaken by us in the last administration to build what I term the knowledge economy. I will also make a couple of recommendations that can advance the process to create this knowledge-based economy. Mr. Speaker, in 2012, we placed here in the Parliament the ICT roadmap, which is the pathway towards this knowledge-based economy. The ICT roadmap is an action-oriented portfolio of initiatives that is divided into 4 areas. 1, ICT strategy, policy, and legislation, which addresses strengthening our ICT governance and administrative framework through the development and promulgation of key pieces of legislation supporting policy guidelines and regulatory reform. Secondly, ICT infrastructure, to continue to build out Jamaica's national ICT infrastructure to facilitate future broadband development and to ensure a competitive sector and digital inclusiveness for all Jamaicans. Third, ICT-enabled public sector modernization, which is solidifying the capacity of public institutions and providing the governance framework to deliver efficient and effective public goods and services through the establishment of a more effective ICT infrastructure. And the fourth area is ICT sector capacity building or innovation enablement, which looks at utilizing appropriate mechanisms to stimulate new business opportunities, innovation, and entrepreneurship in the local ICT sector. I'm going to start with the area of strategy, policy, and legislation. Mr. Speaker, the last administration viewed the promulgation of a new ICT Act as a policy imperative. We began work in 2013 and 2014, which involved looking at the licensing, interconnection, and access provisions in what is now the Telecommunications Act. We went further by doing an examination of the legal and regulatory framework governing the telecom sector with a specific focus on the regulatory agencies and converging their current roles into a single regulator for the ICT industry. Further work is left to be done on the legal and regulatory framework, and we believe, as the Minister has indicated, that a new ICT Act will be tabled in this House very shortly, which will provide the basis for driving the sector going forward. The second area is the establishment of a single ICT regulator. There are right now 3 agencies that regulate the industry: the Office of Utilities Regulation, the Spectrum Management Authority, and the Broadcasting Commission. We recognize that there were inconsistencies, overlapping of jurisdiction, and fragmentation. In 2015, we completed a consulting study which did a review of the current administrative and regulatory framework and a governance model for the ICT sector. And it also proposed an organizational structure for the establishment and implementation of a standalone ICT regulator. The work on the single regulator will be incorporated into the new ICT Act. We believe the work is far advanced, and the Minister indicated that he should be in a position very shortly to have the single ICT regulator implemented. On the area of cybersecurity, Mr. Speaker, we long recognized as an administration, as we provide more and more services online, that it is important that we have a robust cybersecurity framework. In 2014, we developed a national cybersecurity strategy, and we have actually implemented it. There are 4 critical components of that strategy. Technical measures relate to the implementation and establishment of a cyber incident response team, which is now fully operational, staffed by public servants and providing a service right now. Secondly, legislation. We amended the Cybercrimes Act, which, among other things, dealt with new types of cybercriminality, like cyberbullying, and we also increased the penalties and the fines for those who were convicted of cybercriminal activities. Capacity building. We provided training for a number of management information systems officers within government and also for members of the JCF in cybersecurity. And finally, on public education and awareness, we have developed and designed a public education campaign with support from a number of our financial institutions, and this should be launched very shortly. And we also implemented what is termed the Stop, Think, Connect campaign. Let me move to data protection legislation. The importance of data protection legislation, Mr. Speaker, is that for all of us, we have to share sensitive information with our financial institutions, with healthcare providers, and other persons who we interact with. Data protection legislation will provide a framework within which that information is shared, stored, accessed, so that there is adequate protection for those who are providing the information. We began work on this in 2013. We engaged a consultant who looked at the existing legislation across the world. We had stakeholder consultations. A draft bill was prepared last year, and we expect the data protection legislation to come to Parliament very shortly. And now move to ICT infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, we have always felt that access to ICT is a critical component of building the knowledge economy. We decided as an administration to use the funds from the Universal Access Fund to build out community access points across the country. Over the last 4 years, we moved the community access points from 72 to 247. These are computer labs which are in community centers, they are in churches, they are in deep rural areas, they are in urban inner city areas. They provide an opportunity for those persons who don't have access to a computer or technology at their home to go to one of these facilities and use them. We feel very proud of the fact that we have continued the work to ensure that every single Jamaican has access to information technology and the internet. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the community access points, we embarked on an island-wide broadband network project in 2012. which is connecting our schools, our post offices, and our libraries to high-speed internet access. As of February 2016, we connected 68 post offices, 209 educational institutions, 41 libraries. But, Mr. Speaker, we have gone further than that. We decided to connect 60 hospitals and health centers so that the member from West Central St. Catherine, when he speaks of telemedicine, he'll appreciate that the telemedicine will run on the infrastructure, which is this island-wide broadband network. And if you have an issue at Cornwall Regional and you need to do a CT scan, that CT scan can be done and uploaded that the doctor at KPH can see the image. So if you need to be transferred, you can do that immediately. That is the island-wide broadband network. We have all... No, it wasn't just done. No, it wasn't just done. What we did. We have gone further. We are connecting our police stations. And we have already connected 5 out of 73 police stations. And the importance of that, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that the police force can communicate with each other in a closed network which is secure, that they can transfer important information and data, and that can improve their efficiencies and operations. Mr. Speaker, the island-wide broadband network, the analogy I would use, it is like the highway. But it's not just getting you from point A to point B. It is providing a basis for improving the efficient and effective delivery of public services and for ensuring that we build this knowledge-based society. The next area that I want to speak on, Mr. Speaker, is what is termed an internet exchange point. What an internet exchange point does, it allows internet traffic to remain within your country. Right now, all internet traffic leaves Jamaica, goes outside, and comes back in. We recognize that that was not the most effective way to run our internet services. We implemented an internet exchange point, which will allow traffic to remain within the country. It should provide faster internet services, cheaper internet services, and ultimately allow more people to be connected. We implemented it in 2015, and all the technical measures have been complete. There are some commercial arrangements which the telecoms providers need to complete right now. Mr. Speaker, in June 2015, we implemented number portability to enhance competition in the telecom sector. As of May 2016, 62,000 customers have ported their mobile numbers. The next phase of number portability is to move from the mobile to the fixed line and vice versa. And we urge the administration to examine the feasibility of doing this so that we can have full number portability. Mr. Speaker, we implemented our tablets in school pilot project. We recognize that if we're building this knowledge-based economy, our students needed to have access to the technology. And the best and the most effective way and the cheapest way was to use those devices. We delivered 25,000 tablets to students in 38 educational institutions, from basic to primary, to high schools, to tertiary institutions, to the teaching colleges, so that the teachers would embrace the technology. There were a number of things which came out of the project which were positive. We found in many instances, students started to come to school more often. They were more attentive. They were more engaged. And we saw improved GSAT results because students could access GSAT software online. But with any pilot, there are lessons that we learned and which should be incorporated into the full rollout. There was a need for teachers and parents to be more attentive in understanding what the children were accessing. We spent a lot of money putting in security devices which, quite frankly, the students were able to breach. And the issue is, it's not a technology solution. It is educating our students that there are some sites they should not go to and others that they should. We believe it is important for the leadership of schools to play a critical role in ensuring that the full rollout of the Tablets in School project is successful. The third area I'll move to now is public sector modernization. We developed and implemented an ICT governance framework We started in 2013 when we wound up the Central Information Technology Office and we incorporated their functions into MSTEM. We transferred the responsibility for what used to be fiscal services to MSTEM, and we renamed fiscal services eGov Limited. We repositioned eGov to have responsibility for implementing all of GOJ ICT projects. We established a National Information and Communications Technology Advisory Council in 2013, and very importantly, Mr. Speaker, we established the Office of the Chief Information Officer in Government. For the first time in the history of the country, for the first time for any English-speaking Caribbean country, we have a Chief Information Officer who has overall responsibility for managing government's ICT strategy and ICT implementation. Mr. Speaker, there's an area that I want to encourage the current administration to focus on. We started work on implementing GovNet, and there's a rationale why we have to implement GovNet. Right now, the government of Jamaica spends approximately 18 million US dollars or 22.2 billion Jamaican dollars every year on telecommunication services. I'm going to repeat that. The government of Jamaica spends 18 million US dollars on telecommunication services. That's phone, that's internet, that's DSL, everything. We believe that implementing GovNet can reduce that cost by about 50%. What happens right now, Mr. Speaker, every ministry, agency, and department manages its own ICT infrastructure. There is no coordination, there is a lot of overlap, there's a lot of wastage. We received funding from the IDB before we left office for a detailed design of GovNet. I know requests for proposals have been issued, and that design should come back later this year. I'm going to urge and recommend to the administration that they propose a public-private partnership, and there are many players who are willing to implement GovNet so that we can reduce the cost of telecommunication services. The fourth area I want to move to is what is called innovation enablement or capacity building. Mr. Speaker, we established Startup Jamaica, which is an accelerator for tech entrepreneurs designed to take them from having just ideas to having businesses. I want to place on record, Mr. Speaker, our appreciation to our private sector partners. Jamaica National Building Society provided 2 buildings of their office to house Startup Jamaica. Lime, who is now Flow, outfitted and provided the furniture and the telecommunications for the building. DBJ provided financial support. NCB provided financial support. And we partnered with a company called Oasis, who provided equity investment in a number of our startup companies. They actually invested 30,000 US dollars each in 3 of these companies. Startup Jamaica has evolved. It is like any other startup. It has had its ups and downs. There are a number of companies who are now operating out of Startup Jamaica who have built products and services which are designed to take off and which can earn hard currency for those entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, in 2014-2015, we embarked on a project to develop our animation sector. We provided training for a number of instructors from institutions from the Hart Trust, UTech, and other tertiary institutions. We did an assessment of our curriculum. We just completed, under this administration, the second successful staging of the Kingston Animation Festival, which is an international animation festival which attracted entries from almost 100 countries. There's more work to be done to establish an animation advisory board, to develop a strategic plan for the industry, and to continue to train trainers. Mr. Speaker, we recognized in our ICT sector that very often the women were being left behind. So we established a Jamaica Girls Coding Program, which was designed for young ladies to expose them to the art of software development. We have run 2 sets of summer camps. We have introduced trainers from abroad. We intend this year to continue with another summer camp. And ultimately, Mr. Speaker, what we want to see is more young ladies being participants in the hard disciplines of software coding. Mr. Speaker, there is an entrepreneurial ecosystem which has developed in our country. And the government of Jamaica, through the DBJ, has played a role in facilitating this entrepreneurial ecosystem. Where we are right now, Mr. Speaker, one private equity fund has been established, and we expect 2 more to be done in 2016. 2 angel investor networks have been established, 1 Alpha Angels, 1 First Angels. Mr. Speaker, the significance of these is that most of our entrepreneurs cannot get funding from traditional banks. Banks don't lend money to many of the startup businesses. And as such, there has to be an alternative source of funding. And there are a number of investors, high net worth investors, who can't get the type of returns that they used to by placing their money in government bonds, who have decided to put their money in private equity and angel investor funds. And we have seen those develop. The DBJ has trained a number of lawyers because this ecosystem contains a number of different players. 82 lawyers have been trained in a legal toolkit. 50 entrepreneurs have received grants and investments. 271 fund managers, investors, and policymakers have been trained in venture capital and private equity investments. 700 student entrepreneurs have been exposed to business model canvassing. And the 3rd successful venture capital conference, which was held earlier this year, we have attracted over 1,500 participants from all over the world. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party, in its 10-point manifesto for ICT, has indicated that they plan to launch a technology fund to support the sector. I want to caution and urge consideration or reconsideration of that. Mr. Speaker, what our research has found is that there is no shortage of money for persons who want to invest. However, the entrepreneurs are not accessing the money. So there's money there, but they're not accessing it. And the solution is not to create another fund. The solution is to look at the issues and the impediments that are preventing the entrepreneurs from accessing the fund. And there are many. Many of them don't have good business plans. Many of them don't have products or services that people will invest in. And the support has to be at the level of providing mentorship, guidance, business training, and support to these entrepreneurs to put them in a position that they can access the funds. The persons who have money indicate that they are looking for more projects. They don't have enough persons who they can invest in. So I want to urge the administration to consider carefully the establishment of this fund, because I don't believe this is the best use of very scarce resources. Mr. Speaker, an area that we made some progress in our administration, which again I want to urge the administration to take up, is the use of mobile money for PATH beneficiaries. Mobile money really is monetizing, instead of having physical cash, the funds will be on your telephone, your mobile phone. We have a high penetration of mobile phones in the country, and it goes across the socioeconomic groups. Right now, PATH distributes 375,000 beneficiaries on a monthly basis, bi-monthly through the post offices. It is very labor intensive. It is not the most efficient and effective way to deliver that funds. The BOJ, the progress that has been made, the BOJ in 2013 had issued guidelines for electronic retail payment services, which provide the operating parameters for the providers of electronic retail payment services, including mobile money. The Banking Services Act in 2014 included provisions for agent banking, which will enable commercial banks and other deposit-taking institutions to partner with other firms for the delivery of banking services. The DBJ has done a pilot on mobile money, looking at how they manage the microfinance disbursement. This is an area, Mr. Speaker, that we believe is ripe for development, which can provide a catalyst for developing mobile money even further. Capri, and the member from West Central St. Catherine will know this, has done studies looking at the impact of mobile money with PATH beneficiaries. And all the studies point to this as an area that we should embark on and develop. And I'd like to encourage the administration to place some focus on that. Mr. Speaker, last week, Friday, the Minister unveiled our Open Data Portal. And that culminated 2 years of work, which started with an open data assessment done by the World Bank in December 2014. Open data is data that is publicly available and structured in a way that enables any user to access it, to manipulate it, and to share it. The Open Data Portal allows for government data to be published in one place. It is designed to display government data online in a machine-readable format. Very often we complain that we get files in PDF and we can't do anything with it. They will be in a format that you can use it to promote greater transparency to our citizenry and to make the data available to the private sector for creating new products and services. Mr. Speaker, this is one of the revolutionary steps that we started, which was completed by this administration, which not just will enhance transparency, but has the potential to generate significant income for the Jamaican economy. Again, a study done by Capri in 2015 showed that our education sector could gain between $2.2 to $2.7 billion from open data. Tourism could gain from a low of 2.4 billion US to a high of 23 billion US. Open data is something that we must embrace as a country. Mr. Speaker, one element of this knowledge economy that is currently missing is a properly stimulated research environment. Research, whether basic or applied, is an effective way for government funds to be applied, because it's an area that the private sector is not likely to invest in, because the outcomes are not guaranteed and it doesn't yield a marketable product directly. Such activity is important to stimulate, though, because it attracts bright young minds to focus on technical areas and to push their frontiers. It then creates a population which becomes fertile, that becomes a fertile ground for technical innovation, technical training, and increases the confidence of investors who might consider setting up operations here. We believe that the government should utilize the funds that it plans for the technology sector in a fund to stimulate research activity. This can be done on a competitive basis, where you put out a call, whether it's annually, every 2 years or 3 years. You identify a specific problem that you'd like the researchers to focus on. They will respond to whether you call it the RFP, indicating how they plan to tackle that area. We believe that if the government leads in this area, other private sector players will come on board. Mr. Speaker, I want to shift, having indicated the elements that the last administration had put in place to build this knowledge-based economy. I want to shift a little to the energy sector and deal with one area that I had responsibility for. 2 years ago, the then Prime Minister, now opposition leader, asked me to chair a committee to look at how we could tackle the issue of electricity theft. At the time, and I think the figures are no different now, the Jamaica Public Service indicated that 200,000 persons were consumers but not customers of their service. As a result, the government, in partnership with JPS and JSIF, launched what was called Project Step Up in November 2014. We had support from a number of the other multilateral institutions. We started with a pilot project in 7 communities in the corporate area. We wired and certified approximately 850 homes at a cost of just under $400,000 US. Another $1 million US was used to upgrade the primary and secondary infrastructure in these communities. JPS service centers were opened in these communities and are operated by community facilitators. JPS has engaged in a series of community meetings, energy management sessions, because you're moving people who have never paid to people who now have to pay. So they have to manage their energy consumption properly. And having started the pilot in the 7 communities, the plan was to expand this program into an additional 18 communities through the Jamaica Social Investment Fund. Mr. Speaker, I want to conclude by highlighting a case study in my own constituency of McGregor Gardens. In November 2014, there were 7 legitimate customers. 2 minutes, 2 minutes. 2.
The member's time for speaking has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the member's time be expanded by 5 minutes to allow him to conclude his presentation.
The question is that the member's time be extended by 5 minutes. Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in McGregor Gardens 2 years ago, there were 7 legitimate customers of JPS. After going through this program, we now have 224 legitimate customers of JPS. JPS has been able to reduce their losses from well over 90% to now under 70%. And they have, over the last 7 months, been able to collect just under $500,000. Mr. Speaker, this has been as a result of an intense program in this community, involving a number of meetings with the community to change behavior from something that people never ever paid for to something where they decided that they would pay for. Mr. Speaker, JPS implemented the pay-as-you-go prepaid system, where in the same way like you buy credit for your telephone, you buy credit for your electricity. They had the credit being sold at the post office in Vineyard Town, but we went beyond that. We trained members of the community in electrical installation, and they're going to be certified by HART. We wired the homes because one of the biggest impediments to persons legally connecting to JPS is that, one, they can't afford to rewire their own homes. Secondly, they don't own or have any tenancy agreement for the property that they live on, because most of them, in many cases, are squatter communities. And as such, if you are in that position, you cannot legally obtain light. You just can't. We actually did a light bulb swap program in conjunction with UTEC, where we took out the incandescent bulbs, the ones that burn plenty electricity, and we exchanged them for the energy efficiency bulb. We implemented and installed 20 LED streetlights, and we did a number of other community interventions. Mr. Speaker, I use this as a case study because very often we resign ourselves to believing that behavior can't change. Behavior can change with a concerted effort of technical measures, but also social intervention. And I want to commend to the new administration a continuation of that program. Mr. Speaker, I've outlined the steps that we took as an administration in building this knowledge economy. A lot that the wicket has been well laid for plenty runs to be scored by the administration. We encourage them to continue. We have identified a couple of areas that we did not make the kind of progress that we wanted to, and we encourage them to follow up on these things. We believe that together, as a country, we can build this knowledge-based economy. We can use technology to transform our developed country status into a first world status. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.